Hello, and welcome to our Adapt, Pivot, and Persist series. This is a four-part series to address current climate in our government, in our industries, amid recent layoffs, our way of addressing and supporting the Hopkins community who we know have been impacted. This week, we are focusing on tactical actions of retooling your documents and interview prep. It is the third session in our four-part series. The previous two topics were about changing your mindset for forward movement and pivoting and rebranding. The recordings for those sessions are on the website that was just posted in the chat. So feel free to go back in there. This is the series kind of builds on each other. So a lot of what was discussed in the pivoting and rebranding is useful for today's topic on using that rebranding to use in your documents and interview. So I am excited to throw this over to my colleagues, Caitlin Broccoli from the Whiting School of Engineering and Gabrielle Stiles from the Carey Business School. I will be monitoring Q&A and we'll take it from there. Caitlin and Gabrielle, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're happy to be here to talk about these topics. Gabrielle, if you can move to the next slide, just to give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about practical steps to updating your resume, how to do that effectively, tailor your resume for job descriptions. We're also going to talk about refreshing knowledge you may have had on interviewing and how to best prepare for interviews coming up after you've applied for some jobs. So we're going to kick it off with resume. So resume as an overview, I'm sure you may already know this, but your resume is going to be something that you have for every experience that you apply for, whether it's a full-time job, grants, research opportunities, going back to school, whatever your next step is, you'll need your resume for that. And it really is a good narrative of your experiences. And the reason that it's important for two reasons is one, it helps you get through what's called applicant tracking software, which is the software that is used to scan all resumes. Employers, I think it's like 99% of employers out there use ATS systems to scan and weed out candidates to get to even make it to a human's eyes to view your document. So, and then that next step is making sure your document speaks to a recruiter or an employer's language. What will they want to most see come out of that? And so when you're really thinking about retooling your document, you want to kind of reflect and analyze what it is that you want and what the employer should know about you as a candidate. All right. Next slide. The key that I want you all to take away from this is that resumes are extremely subjective. So this is all just best practices, but you really should meet with somebody to review your resume for your own personal circumstance. Everybody's resume is going to look slightly different because you're going to be tailoring it for your positions that you're applying for. But to go over some key differences between a resume and a CV, you may have been told previously that your resume should be 1 page long. Depending on how much experience you do have, your resume can be 2 pages, 2 full pages. You're going to be focusing more on your skills and outcomes that are industry related. So particularly for those full-time jobs. Once you've graduated, so if you're an alum, your education is likely going to be secondary to your experience. So your education section may have first been at the very top of your resume because that was the most applicable when you graduated. But now that you have graduated, now your work experience is actually more of what the employer will want to see. So you can actually move that section above your education. CVs tend to be a little longer, so they are focused on more of your academic accomplishments, positions in research, academia, sometimes even healthcare will maybe request a CV. It's focused more on those academic accomplishments like publications, presentations, etc. Let's see. I think that was realistically all I wanted to cover on that piece. Yep. Okay. So as you're updating your resume now, depending on your situation, you're going to want to think of how do I want to showcase these accomplishments that I'm most proud of? So I find it specifically really helpful to get a printout version of your resume and start highlighting the pieces of your resume where you feel like you were most engaged, like you most thrived in that kind of environment, what you had the most motivation. That can be really helpful because you'll start to notice some themes there, and that's going to be helpful for when you're once we get into like interviews and Gabrielle starts talking about that, giving examples and concrete examples of times where you have attributed a certain skill is going to be really, you're going to be more passionate about it if you know you were really motivated in those types of tasks or assignments that you had. Um, and then also highlighting what challenges have you overcome. So like if there was a particularly challenging experience or a particularly challenging work environment, you might want to come up with some examples during your experiences then that you can also then utilize in an interview down the road. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so transferable skills. Transferable skills are going to relate to both your technical and your soft skills. Soft skills being more of your interpersonal skills like communication, leadership, conflict resolution, teamwork. Your technical skills are just that. Those are the technical abilities that you have to be able to do that job. You may have heard before, it's a lot easier to teach someone technical skills than it is to teach soft skill development. So when you're looking at tailoring job applications, you really want to highlight the transferable skills that you have, particularly as they relate to those soft skill development or those soft skills that you have. Reframing your experience. So this whole 4-part series is really about reframe and pivoting. So it's the same thing with your resume, your documents. So how can you align what you currently have to this new role if you're taking on a new role or if you're switching industries, maybe you're staying in the same industry, but you want to highlight some additional skills that you've gained. An example of, how this might look would be marketing to product management or vice versa. A transferable skill you would have is understanding consumer behavior, working cross-functionally. Anytime you can really talk about working cross-functionally, I think every employer asks for that. So you would want to highlight that in particular. Focusing on achievements too. So we're going to talk a little bit about concrete examples of this, but don't get too caught up in your past job title or your current job title, or even the job title that you're going to apply for jobs for. So you want to focus more on your achievements. What are some concrete examples of things that you've done, achieved, that you're most proud of, and how can those really be beneficial for an employer to know that you've done? And we're going to talk about how to take not just the statements that you have on a resume, but how do you actually translate them now to what the job description is looking for or what the hiring manager would be specifically looking for in that instance. All right. So some action steps. You may have this already, you may not, but you're going to want to have an everything resume, it's called. So this is just a running document of all of your experiences. I personally have a Google Doc of just everything that I have really ever done. And I just keep it on there so that I can just keep adding to it. And then you can take from it once you start applying for positions. So it's helpful when you're tailoring so many resumes to so many different jobs that you download a copy of that everything resume each time and start tailoring it for that job. And then go in and rename your documents, your name, and then underscore the position you're applying for or the company you're applying to, because you don't want to submit the wrong resume, submit, your master document that you haven't edited. You want to stay organized in that manner. And on this everything resume, you're going to make sure you have effective bullet point statements. So what you did, how you did it, what the outcome was. You can also use like action, project, result. There's a bunch of different acronyms out there, but the main point is to tell them what you did and what you accomplished. Always starting with an action verb. And then you're going to use this document again to serve as a reference point. And so I think the most tedious part of job applying or applying to jobs is tailoring your documents for every single job. It's tedious, but it is going to help you and you're going to be more successful if you do it. Sometimes it's helpful when you're tailoring or prioritizing what experiences you want to highlight on your resume, having job descriptions and highlighting what you keep noticing, what keeps coming up in those required qualifications. Are there skills that a lot of jobs keep saying? Or there soft skills? What words are they using to describe the soft skills that they're looking for in a candidate? Some might use teamwork, some might use cross-functional collaboration, some just use collaboration. Whatever it is, those are keywords that they're looking for. And so you'll start to notice some themes pop up in these job applications as you're applying to some jobs, if they're in if a similar industry. And then you want to quantify and showcase impact. So this is a really big deal for recruiters specifically and hiring managers, is they want to see what your impact was. So what was the end result if you have it? So when you can use quantifiable data to support the work that you've done in the past, you're elevating your documents and your candidacy for that role. So did you improve something by X percentage? How many people did you work with in the team? How many people did you present to? Was it a large audience? Like, think of these numbers. They can seemingly be small, but at the end, they're looking to see your what's the word I'm looking for? They're looking to see your impact, but they're also looking to see your capacity. What have you done in the past? So Gabrielle and myself work with students. How many students are in our portfolio? That's an action or a quantifiable impact that we have when we can show our engagement rate with that many students. So that's just another example. And so once you have what we would call your bullet point statements or your accomplishment statements, now you have to tailor it, right? So now that's where that relational piece of the accomplishment statements comes in. So we talked about emphasizing your work, action, project, result. And now we're talking more about the relationship. So how do I articulate the importance of this outcome in relation to this job that I'm applying for? So to what degree does it relate? And then our next slide will have an example of how you might do this, or how a student or a current student or how an alum might take their experience and switch it over. So on the left of the screen, you can see, what the statement is for this experience on the master document. So partnered with Center for Social Concern, or insert whatever, community involvement committee to increase student volunteers from 160 to 350 members by integrating CSE programming with online conferencing platform. This particular person's applying for a Java and GitLab software engineer. And one of the responsibilities, which is a key example of a job description where you're going to be looking for those keywords, is the responsibilities in that required qualifications section. But under it, it says integrate existing software into a new or modified systems or operating environments. So this person has taken what they have, they've taken the job description language, and now they've gotten to the place where they've created this revised relational accomplishment statement on the right here. So integrated, you can see they're using, right off the bat, they're using the same verb that the job description used. So integrated existing programmatic content for the Center of Social Concern into a new online system for conferencing using Java and C++. Increased student volunteers from 160 to 350 members. So they used that language, they told exactly what they did, and then they showcased that outcome. So even if this position is in a completely different industry, versus it's not a nonprofit, they have shown how they can do that similar work, and those transferable skills are applied in this statement as it relates to that job in particular. All right. Next slide. Keyword optimization. So when you're looking at, well, how am I going to know what the keywords are? Like, I keep tailoring it, but how do I know? A key thing that you want to focus on, again, are those responsibilities and the required qualifications. That doesn't mean if you don't meet all of the qualifications that you shouldn't apply for the job. We talked about this in the last session. If you have a majority of the qualifications, but you're missing a few, I would say still apply for that job. Let them say, no, this isn't the right thing we're looking for. This isn't the right candidate we're looking for. And, don't take yourself out of the running. Keep putting those applications out there because, again, those job descriptions are guidelines. And depending on the candidate, the pool of candidates that come in, you really want to just do your best to stand out. And things that you can do, you can utilize functions on ChatGPT, tools like JobScan to actually upload your resume and upload a job description where it matches, and you can see what keywords you should filter into your resume. You don't have to bold those keywords in your resume. That really doesn't matter. It doesn't make it stand out more to the ATS or to the recruiter. But it'll be there on that document, and that's the best case scenario. The other thing is, don't just put keywords in a skills section. So that's something that I see often is people will say, oh, they want these soft skills. I'm going to add those to my skills section. I'm going to add that I'm good at teamwork. I'm a leader. I have good collaboration skills, whatever it may be. Those should not be listed in that section. They should be infused into the bullet point statements that you have describing the work that you do. You want to be able to show them. You're not just like telling them you have this. You want to actually showcase that you have those skills. Similarly to when you go interview, you're not going to say, I have really good communication skills and then stop talking. So we'll let Gabrielle go into that piece. But that is the gist of the resume piece and updating it. Yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I feel like you just, again, dovetail perfectly into interviewing and do's and don'ts, right? So as you know, resumes don't guarantee you anything as far as securing a job, but the strategy behind your resume is to secure you an interview. So as we dig into interview tips and tricks, we want to think about interviewing like you would think of any skill. You have to practice it. If you think about building muscle, it takes lifting weights to strengthen that muscle. So you have to take the time, put the energy and effort into developing that skill and get more comfortable talking about yourself in different types of settings. So some things to consider when you are trying to flex this skill is, how well do you know yourself? How well do you know yourself? How well do you know the company and the role that you're interested in? How thorough were you in combing through this job description to really identify where there's an overlap or where your skills can really be leveraged and maximized? And really writing them out. Similar to what Caitlin said, like having those tangible documents can go a long way. So having your resume and highlighting the things that make you excited or the things that you really felt like you were in a groove. Similarly to the job description, if you have the job description available, whether you do it digitally or you have it tangibly in your hand, that's what I like to do. I like to have the job description, and as it's asking for responsibilities or as it lists out what I will be doing, I like to write in where I've done those things before in my previous work experience so I can know or feel comfortable with how I can leverage my skills with this new opportunity. So as you're considering those things, you want to make sure that you take time to thoroughly conduct your research. So you're not just going to comb through the company's website or the job description. You want to really learn about the culture. What's their mission statement? What are their values? Are there any recent developments that are happening that you can find out? Do you have Google alerts, like where they can alert you? Google will alert you to any new developments that are currently happening with that company or trending with that company. How involved are you with social media? Are you following their accounts on all the platforms that social media can offer? Are you able to maximize your networking? Like, who are you able to connect with in a professional platform like a LinkedIn and learn more about the company, or maybe perhaps an alumni, a JHU alumni is working at that company. Perhaps you're able to make a connection with someone who works at that company, who can share some insights into what that company really values or what's going on and how you can strategically approach the interview. So you want to use that knowledge to shape your responses and really iron out your value add to the company. You're competing with hundreds of other applicants. And, they all can say that this is something that they want to do, but what does it look like for you individually? What does your impact look like? How have your past experiences helped shape or prepare you for this type of role? So as we know, you all are not new to interviewing, right? But they're just a refresher of common interview types. So we have the behavioral interview, which is probably one of the most common interview types where people really take the time to look into how you handle different scenarios, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We have case style interviews, which are primarily found in the consulting industry, but we have found that more companies and industries are adopting the case style interview format because it helps them really assess your thought process. So if there's an opportunity to practice case interviewing, that's recommended. It doesn't mean that, again, it has to be a consulting role. It's just good to have that practice of structuring your answers. Then there might be an assessment or competency-based type of interview where it's more technical. They kind of want to see what specific skills in alignment with the job you have or are able to demonstrate and whether it's a good fit. So then there's different types of mediums that you can have these interviews. Might be on site, where as soon as you arrive at the location, you get to take in the experience a little differently. There's phone, which unfortunately they don't have those nonverbals where you get that validation or the head nod or the smile that you're doing a great job. So those are always fun and interesting. Then there's those Zoom and video interviews, which are more common, especially post-COVID. The group interviews usually happen earlier in your career where there's multiple candidates. And then there's the common panel interview where there's multiple interviewers and one interviewee, which would be yourself. So we're going to take some time to focus in on the behavioral style interviews because they're so common, and why employers typically ask behavioral style questions is because they feel that past experience predicts future behavior. So they really want to know how you would handle these situations. And we always recommend the STAR story. I mean, there's different strategies around behavioral style, but a popular strategy is the STAR story. So the STAR story helps us tell complete, structured, well thought out stories that demonstrate high impact in an interview. So we recommend having 4 to 6 interviews, or I'm sorry, 4 to 6 skills that you really want to demonstrate that the employer needs to know. And again, emphasis on what they need to know. So you're going to be really strategic with how you're crafting this story. And I'll get into a little bit later, but we call them pocket stories, and I'll share how that came about. But you want to try to craft at least 4 to 5 from different angles because different questions can come up at different times, which could also be answered with the same story. So you want to find stories that paint you in a positive light. They don't paint anyone else in a negative light. So you're not going to place blame on someone else, but they're really going to demonstrate your value and how you navigated those different situations. And again, you want stories that can be adjusted to address different situations. So think back to times where you took on a leadership role or overcame a challenge, collaborated with a team, you were able to communicate with various stakeholders, manage multiple priorities, times where you might have failed, or times where you've had your greatest success. Were there times that you experienced a conflict or had to hurdle a barrier? So thinking through those different types of scenarios, you want to use the STAR method where you're describing a situation, a task, an action, and the outcome of what that story or what that skill, how that skill was demonstrated and how it can be a value add to the company that you're currently interviewing with. So using the job description, it can kind of give you an idea of what types of scenarios you might encounter in that role. But again, just thinking through those stories that paint you in a positive light and also using the language of the skill you want to demonstrate. Like if you want them to know that you have really strong communication skills, make sure you use that language in your response. So you talk about using strong communication skills or using your conflict resolution skills if that's something you want them to take away from your answer. I'm going to take some time to look at some other common questions that pop up during an interview, which is, tell me about yourself. It's usually the first question that sets the stage. What would you say is your greatest strength? What would you say is your greatest weakness? Why are you interested in this role or organization? What are your career goals? And as we're navigating right now, this time of change and adaptability and all this uncertainty, there might be some more questions that you can anticipate there as well. In an effort to help you prepare for those types of questions, we want you to think about your story. What's your narrative? As you're navigating this time of career transition, what does that look like? And how can you craft it in a way that really resonates with the employer and they can really, again, find the value add, as I keep saying that, but that's what's really important, right? Is to demonstrate why they need you on their team. So you want to frame this transitional time as growth, realignment of values, industry changes, et cetera. So it's a positive shift, right? It's an opportunity for you to grow in another capacity. It's an opportunity for you to add value to another company or explore a different skill. Some other things to consider as you're crafting your narrative is how you can connect the dots from where you started to why this particular role. And from a broader or macro lens, what's your why? What do you want your impact to look like? And how do you want to go about that? How are you able to make sense of your journey? And I think this is where some people get hung up on the interview process, because the employer will have your resume in front of them. And so they can see your professional journey, but how are you able to make it make sense for them as to why you're sitting in front of them and why you should be considered for this opportunity? And then again, what are your pocket stories, which I referenced earlier? And pocket stories is a phrase that one of our faculty members at Carey named. He teaches the business communications class, and he named them pocket stories, which I guess when you think about the visual of just pulling stories out of your pocket to demonstrate a skill or convey a certain message, which I think is a nice little friendly reminder of how convenient they should be, how readily accessible you should have these stories. So thinking through what your narrative is a huge help when you're practicing your ability or your skill set of articulating your strengths and value to a company. Another thing that's important to remember when you're interviewing is that it's a two-way street. You all are seasoned professionals. You're not new to interviewing. You have so much experience that you're bringing to a company. And it's important to remember that this is a partnership. We encourage you to reframe the interview as a conversation rather than a test. So instead of trying to prove your worth, understand your value and how it can benefit the company, how it can be a mutually beneficial partnership versus you trying to show them like, oh, pick me. We don't want the pick me energy, right? We want them to understand your value and want you on their team. So when you're thinking about this two-way street of interviewing and you're thinking about the questions you want to ask the employer, make sure that you show engagement and curiosity, excitement and passion about the opportunity. So here's some sample questions, but there's so many other questions you can ask that really show your interest in the company and the role. But what we don't want you to do is sell past the close. So we don't want you to overdo it. I actually had a student meeting last week where we were talking about, you talked yourself into the interview and then you talked yourself out of it because they were so eager to show their value that it actually became they did too much, and it was what they did was enough. And just having the confidence in what you're able to bring is enough at times. And if you feel like there's something else you want to share with the employer, it's okay to follow up in a thank you note, right? And just briefly touch on some things that you would really like to emphasize a little bit more. But we also don't recommend is asking questions that are easily researchable. So you have the job description, and hopefully it's thorough, and we can get into what a big job description looks like. You also have the company website. So if there's any questions of clarification regarding something you found in the job description or on the website, that's perfectly acceptable to ask. But what we're saying with this message is we don't want you to ask like, so what will I be doing exactly? Because the job description is there. So you want to make sure that your questions are intentional, they make sense, they show interest, they show that you've done your research and have a really strong question for them to answer. But remember, it's a two-way street. You're not the only person in the hot seat for these job interviews. And with that note, we really want you to trust your experiences. Like we said, this is a partnership between you and another company. So trust your journey. All the experience that you're able to bring and contribute to a company is your advantage. And all this uncertainty that you're navigating demonstrates resiliency. So you're bringing this all to a new company. And so we want you to really walk in that confidence, right? And show that you have something to contribute. And embracing that change is so valuable to an organization. So the fact that you're able to adapt and adjust and reinvent, like that's a huge value add. So being able to trust and own that within your professional journey and letting your personality shine. Because again, it's a two-way street. You want to be in a position where you can show up as your authentic self at work, right? There's the authenticity is such a value when you are navigating what these workplace dynamics look like. And we have conversations with students where they try to sound professional, and we're like, hey, and trying to sound professional, sometimes that trips you up even more. So you want to still present a polished version of yourself, but you also want to make sure that after the interview, you can still show up as your authentic self after you get the job. So authenticity is important. Some action items as you're trying to prepare for your interview is work on your star stories. Get your pocket stories ready and in your pocket. Like we said, have a few of them and make sure that they, again, do not paint anybody in a negative way. You don't want to say like, oh, well, they didn't listen to me, so then I had to do this. You want to make sure that your star story, your pocket story demonstrates your value add, your impact, and what that looks like. Practice, practice, practice. So there's so many AI platforms you can take advantage of now that you can have that feedback. They're so advanced where they can give you feedback on your tone, your cadence, your body posture, like all those things. So we listed LinkedIn interview prep, but there's also VMock and Big Interview and other platforms that you can look into. Don't be afraid to ask your family and friends for some guidance. They're your immediate network and they know you really well. So, whether it's a former classmate or your family, they don't have to be industry aligned. It can just be someone who knows you and knows, something you might have left out, something that you don't know that you do, you don't notice that you do, but someone else can catch it. And it's just good to have that person in front of you to simulate a real life interview, but also it's a safe space for you to get stuff wrong and continue to refine your practice. While you're practicing, you want to focus on your tone, clarity, and conciseness. We want interview answers that are thorough yet succinct. We want to know the story. We want to know the context behind the story and the strength or the pocket story, but you also don't want to lose your audience. So really emphasizing conciseness. Try to keep it 3 to 5 minutes. Anything longer, you might lose the focus of those interviewing you. What I've also found really useful is recording yourself. So whether it's a video recording with your phone or just a voice memo where you're asking yourself questions and then answering them, we're our toughest critics, right? So who's going to critique you more than yourself? And not saying that we should be hard on ourselves, but listening to yourself, you start to see what you might not notice you do. Like maybe you're a gesturer and you talk really, really make these very large gestures, which can be distracting, or perhaps you use a lot of filler words that, we're human. We might say we might say like, we might say this or that. But if it's distracting, you might catch it and be like, oh no, I gotta take some more time to pace myself with these responses. So again, use those tools and tricks when you're practicing. Reflect on past interviews, and you know how you felt when an interview went really well. You're like, oh, I crushed it. That was such a good interview. Or you might say like, ooh, that was really tough. I wasn't prepared for that question. So think back and reflect on those experiences and what threw you off and why, or what were you feeling when you were in that groove of interviewing really well. And also being that you all are, adjusting and exploring a different opportunity, there might be a question about salary. And, we want you to be prepared to have those negotiation conversations. Usually, you're not going to be the person to bring up salary. We don't want you to ask any questions that are like, hey, how much money will I be making, right? But in the small chance that the employer brings it up first, you want to make sure that you've done your research and are prepared to answer any questions about salary. So thinking through and with the research that you're conducting, how thorough are you doing it? What are some common ranges that you can count on when you're looking into this role? So takeaways from today's session. There's no cookie cutter approach. So Caitlin and I have thrown a lot at you today, and I think it's important to know that Your story, your experience is unique to you. These are some guidelines and tips that align with best practices. But again, you have to find what makes sense for you that is also in alignment with the best practice. So it's not going to look like the person next to you, or your mentor might give you some advice, but yours still might look different than what they've shared. Conduct as much research as possible. You want to make sure that you are prepared for anything that they might throw at you. So how well do you know yourself? How well do you know the role of the company? Research as much as possible. And again, don't forget social media. Use AI as a tool. So we don't want AI to replace your voice. Remember, authenticity is important. So use it as a tool as it makes sense. If you're experiencing writer's block and you need to kickstart something, or you're trying to figure out a better way to craft that bullet, AI might be a good tool to just play around in and say like, okay, that's cool. Oh, that sounds a lot better. But make sure it does not replace your voice. Similarly to interviewing, use it as a tool, check your posture, check your cadence, etc. But it is a tool that we want you to use, right? Like a calculator. Work smarter, not harder, but also don't lose the authenticity that makes you you, and that your voice is present in the room and through your application documents. Practice makes progress. We don't say practice makes perfect. So while you're flexing that skill, while you're prepping for that interview, there's no perfect interview. There's no perfect resume. So as much as you keep working through it, keep tailoring, targeting, tweaking, seeing what's working, what's not working, that's progress towards achieving your goal. And understand that the job search is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It's a long journey. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's defeating. Like we know that there's a lot of challenges that you will encounter in a job search. But we want to remind you to build in that time for reevaluation of your strategy. So as you are thinking through what's working or what went well during that interview, great. If you're thinking like, okay, I submitted my resume to X amount of companies and I haven't gotten an interview, then it might be time to reevaluate your resume, because maybe you're not optimizing the keywords as well as you would have liked. And similarly with interviews, if you're hitting a roadblock with interviewing, you might need to reevaluate how you're delivering your responses. So building in that time to reevaluate is so important to your search. And also connect with the career team at your school. Whichever JHU school that you graduated from, they all have a career center. So connect with them and see what their alumni policies are, so that if there's a resource that you can take advantage of that you didn't know you had access to, that you're then able to use that. So I'm going to pause there and open it up for any questions.
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle and Caitlin, so much. I know it's not easy to do the same presentation twice in a row, so excellent job, you two. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A for folks attending. Feel free to add them to the chat or the Q&A feature. But our first one goes back to what Caitlin mentioned about the what plus how plus outcome format for your bullets. So I don't know if Gabrielle, you can like go back in the slides to that particular slide, the what plus how plus outcome format. So should this format be used? I think it was, yes, around or maybe
Yeah, that looks, in the
that's
first.
kind of the one. Um,
Yep.
So should that be used for every bullet? When I follow the format, I end up with 2 to 3 lines of text for each bullet. It makes my resume very dense and not easily scannable.
I mean, I would say it definitely shouldn't be more than 2 lines for each bullet point. That tends to be kind of the standard. If you need help consolidating that, I would say, again, have somebody read it for you. That's the easiest thing to do before you submit a final draft for a job. I think the biggest piece for your, the everything resume is to just get the content on there so that you can then tweak it as needed to fit a page or 2 pages or however it's going to look for your document. Because again, everybody's is going to be very, very specific and very subjective. The hard piece about resumes, just being perfectly honest, is some people we don't know who's viewing that document on the other end. And that's the hardest piece, right? So some people might not like that there's a lot of words on there. Some people want there to be more words. And so we don't have any way of really knowing that. And that's a really challenging piece when it comes to resume. So again, this is just the overall standard that we hear from recruiters as far as best practices go. So I would say definitely no more than 2 lines is plenty. And if you can find ways to avoid some filler words and keep it more of just a statement, that would be the best option. Again, for every bullet point, the ones that you want to focus more on the things that you have actionable, like quantifiable outcomes on. So if something doesn't have a quantifiable outcome, it might be a shorter bullet point length. So when you're looking at your experiences, see which ones are like, this was a meteor project that I worked on. Like I'm going to have more to say here than I am about, this administrative task that I had. That's just sort of kind of a part of my job. So I hope that helps kind of clarify that.
Yeah, and I would agree. And we get so tied and it's so personal to us, our resumes and the bullets and how we talk about our jobs. So it's important to like take what Caitlin and Gabrielle said about, what do the prospective employers, what are they caring about? You don't need to put everything on your resume. If a question comes up in an interview that you're going to be asked about, you can always bring up a separate project, but you're going to have that everything resume, and then you're going to pull over the accomplishments and the bullets that are going to be relevant to the jobs that you're applying for. So you're not listing everything, and yeah, your bullet should go beyond 2 lines. Also play with formatting, 0.5 inches all around is the smallest margins. You should have 10 size font. So playing with that can also help you. And then
Also types of font too.
types of
Like,
font.
yeah, can make it look spacing wise more appealing. So play with that as well.
Yeah. White space is excellent to have on the resume. And also, you know, ask ChatGPT, how would you make this more concise? Make sure it's relevant and it's true to what you did, but get kind of broken out of your own thought cycles and just ask, ChatGPT. All right, so staying on the resume, questioning, can you share your opinion on an executive summary at the top versus a bulleted list of key skills at the top? I have heard both suggested, many pieces of advice, but wondering what is more effective for getting through an ATS. So executive summary versus keywords, key skills at the top.
By executive summary, I'm assuming that means like a paragraph format there versus bulleted. That's a really good question. I mean, I don't have like an end all be all answer, but I think it really depends on, as long as the keywords are there and you're trying to highlight. I think if you're pivoting industries, sometimes that paragraph is a little bit more um, um, relevant than, or it's easier for an employer to see if they're reading it in a paragraph format versus if you're in the same industry and you're highlighting those key skills that they're already seeing. So that's my opinion. I don't know if Gabrielle or Michelle have others, but that would be kind of my rule of thumb. Like if I were to apply something completely out of the realm of education, I'm not going to do a bulleted summary. I'm going to do an actual paragraph executive summary
Yeah, I
versus
agree.
if I apply to another education role.
Yeah, I agree, Caitlin. Just to piggyback off of what she said, sometimes the paragraph creates that narrative. And it is useful for career changers or mid-career professionals because it connects the dots. So all that we keep emphasizing is connecting the dots to really demonstrate your value add. And sometimes when you have that executive summary, it provides that context before they get into the weeds of your resume. So just to build off of what she said.
Yep, nothing to add. Another ATS question, applicant tracking system software. So I saw somewhere that there are only certain font types that are ATS compatible. Times New Roman and Calibri are recommended. Is this true?
Yes, it does tend to be true. You don't want to really go for any funky fonts. Not that you would, but like keeping to those that are more I think the ones that are most um recognized by ATS are those Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial. I might be missing one, but like those are kind of the standard ones that ATS picks up. It's also recommended that you submit a PDF format anytime you submit, a cover letter or a resume. Avoid using tables to keep your experience aligned because a lot of times those tables don't go through the same way. So it scans differently and the person on the other side reads it differently. So overall, those are sort of the main ATS things that I have heard in the past, just as rule of thumb.
Yeah, if you're not moving to be a graphic designer, the resume is no place to try to get funky. You
Yeah.
want to be clean, easy to read, nothing too crazy. All right, so let's see. I think that kind of hits. Okay, so follow up, can we use columns? Will that get past ATS? So if we list skills, can we do that in columns? I think it's kind of the same thing as
Yeah.
tables. Use the tab markers at the top. That can help you line things up
Yeah.
by using the tabs.
I
Place.
would avoid, yeah, I would avoid it
Yeah.
and just use the spacing or tabs as well.
All right. So this is kind of to both resume and interviewing. So it's just kind of that pitching yourself. So jobs in my field, which was biotech, almost always require very specific experience. But without getting a job, I can't get experience. How do I convince an employer that I'm worth hiring / training without having required experience?
This seems like highlighting those transferable skills, and of course, Michelle and Caitlin can add more to this, but I'm rereading the question. So
Me
yeah,
too.
I mean, I would just focus on transferable skills from the job description. If you're saying like, oh, I need the experience or specific experience, there might be an opportunity to highlight something similar that you've done. Also networking would be something that I lean into with this role. And I know there's a series coming up in a few weeks where they focus on networking, but sometimes you might not be able to enter through that front door. You might need the side door to open for you so people can really appreciate the value that you can bring. And you just need one yes, you need one person to advocate for you at times. So that's what's coming to mind for me right now is networking and focusing on those transferable skills.
Yeah, I would agree. And we're gonna, and Gabrielle can put up the slide of the next series. So I think it's April 22nd. We're gonna be talking about actionable networking. So this would be a great use of an informational interview by identifying people who are working in this job that you're asking about with very specific experience and asking them directly, getting their feedback on how, so it's not an interview, it's a conversation where you're reaching out and you're like, I'm really interested in your role. I don't want to replace you, but I'm really interested in like being a coworker in your field. And I just really trying to get over this and just getting their feedback on it. But also, convincing an employer that you're worth hiring and training, you know, you can mention, you can highlight those skills of, especially in a cover letter, maybe of ways that you've really quickly learned and self-initiated learning and having that growth mindset to pick up on complex requirements, skills, so you can grow on the job. All right, let's see. So now we've got some questions. So how do you make sure to be aware of or maintain steady confidence, so to speak, um, in the proving versus partnering aspect during an interview? So maintaining confidence of proving versus partnering when you've been in the job market for an extended period of time and are running out of time to land an opportunity. So how do you not seem so needy to what you said, Gabriella? Like you're running out of time. You need to get the job. How do you kind of have that confidence
Yeah.
for that?
Yeah, the pick me energy, right? We're trying to avoid the
Mhm.
pick me energy. So that's really challenging, especially when there's a lot of urgency that's motivating this entire process, right? We need a job to pay our bills, or we can't afford to, live out our livelihood and our lifestyle. So I think it goes back to something that Caitlin and I were talking about with like knowing yourself. So like whether you're taking some time to really comb through your resume and know what your experiences are, or connecting your experiences to the job description and just being able to understand your value add to the team, understand what your impact can look like. It's not easy. What I'm saying is easier said than done, right? Because there's so much nerves surrounding the interview, but it's really owning your confidence, owning your experience and your value add, referencing the things that are relevant and focusing on the things that actually, to Michelle's point, the employer will care about. So, when you're thinking about your confidence and staying away from the proving point, when you're getting to the proving point, that means you're talking fast and you're trying to pull out all the experiences that you think are relevant, but you really want to narrow it down to that 1 to 2 examples you can really provide that really demonstrate that value add and that impact really well. So when you're thinking through your pocket stories, you're thinking through the best ones, and then you are making sure that they're practiced, they're adaptable. You can pull them out your pocket whenever you need to, and trusting the way that you're telling the story about yourself is how they need to receive that. So that goes back to researching the employer and what they're looking for.
I think too, another tip for maintaining that confidence is knowing that they already know you're qualified. Like if they're bringing you in for the interview, they know you're qualified. They understand that. So you should feel confident that you don't have to necessarily prove that you're qualified for that job. They're getting to know you, you're getting to know them. So hopefully that should ease. I know it's a challenging process and a stressful one, but that's just another tip for maintaining that confidence.
Great point.
So should I approach the hiring team before applying to answer questions about the position or institution, or should I save those for the interview? I'm wondering if you mean if you should approach them to ask questions about the position or saving those for the interview. Um, but uh, we'll maybe approach it both ways. I would say don't approach them answering questions, but yeah, what are your thoughts on approaching prospective colleagues or hiring managers as you go through the application process?
I mean, one of my favorite things that I like to share with students is not what you say, it's how. So I think there's always an opportunity to ask questions to gain more information, especially when you're in your research and data collecting phase of trying to figure out if this is a good fit or opportunity for you, or if it's in alignment with your skills. So you can absolutely reach out with questions. It's how you go about it, and it's what you're asking them. Like, what are you asking them in this time that is really helping you make that decision. And if what you're asking them is going to perception, like how are they going to perceive your asks and requests? So that matters too. But I would also look at it similarly to like a networking situation or informational interview. So if they know that you're a candidate for a role, they can't answer but so many questions. But if they know that you're just expressing interest in a role and you're just inquiring about some specifics, just to know more about it before you apply, that's perfectly acceptable.
Great. Okay. Two more. And so this is, I think, a quick one. So do you have any preferred templates for digital portfolios that you would recommend using? Um, I think this could be industry based. Definitely make sure your LinkedIn profile is updated. So with all the rebranding that you're doing from 2 weeks ago, and then the nuggets of wisdom Caitlin and Gabrielle shared, making sure your online persona and profile is up to date with that. But then if you have work that you're needing to show as an actual digital portfolio, I think depending on the industry, there might be certain things that are better based on what you're
Yeah,
doing. Caitlin?
you could do like you could create like your own website portfolio through free things like Wix or
Mhm.
Squarespace, or I've seen that before, but if it's more industry based, I've seen things like GitHub. So depending on the industry, um, those would be just a couple of ideas of preferred templates of what I would consider.
Yeah. Okay, so our remaining question is a big one. And so how do we highlight experiences that potential employers might be nervous to expand or support under the current administration? So equity, health equity, climate change, LGBTQ plus rights, um, anything that might be targeted, seemingly targeted at the moment. So how do we highlight those experiences um, to potential employers?
That's a real tough one.
I'm happy to, I had this
Um,
conversation with my GA this week, so I'm happy to kind of start it.
oh yeah,
Um,
if you
if
want
you
to,
want.
Michelle, I'm happy to
Yeah.
piggyback on some thoughts.
So with these affinity-based, identity-based organizations that you may be part of, or initiatives like health equity, climate change that seem to be against kind of especially if you have governmental roles, or looking for more local state government or even more federal jobs. It's again more about the work that you've done, and the accomplishments and the skills that you've done. I would say no matter, I've had students that have been on both sides of the party structure, made two major parties in the US, that have noted things on both sides that might be more, what's the word? Um, really obvious in like the political leaning and less about the work that they did. So again, just going back to the core of what is the work that you've done that you want to showcase. And if you are drawn to employers, you're wanting that support, especially around that identity-based affinity. It's looking at the employers that are still promoting their employee resource groups, of showing, they might be taking kind of some of the language, making it less direct language, but still showcasing the employee resource groups. Um, and so just showing your interest in that through just noting that you've always been, as a student, as a professional, you want to expand your community beyond the work that is in your job description. You want to give back to your organization, and so that you'd be interested in those ERGs. So there's ways with less direct communication to get around that. But Caitlin and Gabrielle, I'd open it to you too.
Yeah, I would agree. And I was gonna just post some things in the chat too in terms of specific job boards that are focused more on mission too. So looking at um, different job search boards, but I think Michelle, you really covered what I was thinking too in terms of focusing on your accomplishments and the work that you did, and not so much the not getting too wrapped up in that. So it's seemingly hard to say, but because it's a challenge. But I think for the purposes of job searching and applying, um, you want to really quantify the impact that you had because you had a good impact. And so it's a really tough question to ask, but I'm really glad that you asked it because it's important. And I don't think that you should stray away from the impact that you had in that role, um, because we just don't know what those employers are thinking. And if they're nervous, but you did what you did, and that's important work.
Mhm.
Gabrielle, any last thoughts on that one before we wrap up?
I mean, I think you two covered it beautifully. Just researching, like really understanding who is standing 10 toes down on what they said they were going to do and who isn't. And hopefully, I know that's not always a luxury for everybody, but hopefully those are companies that you can target so that there's less fear associated with how those things are formatted, how those experiences are formatted on your resume. But I think Michelle and Caitlin covered it really well.
And Caitlin just put in the chat a few, so maybe quickly copy and paste it
Yeah, they
before.
didn't link the way I wanted them to, so you would copy and paste that
Yeah, copy and
paragraph.
paste it, and so you can search more. But with that, we thank you for joining tonight. And we do have the open networking chat next week, April 14th from 5 to 6. Again, an informal secondary supplement to these formal educational topics. So it's open to ask questions. And then April 22nd is our fourth and final session on actionable networking. And again, all the recordings are posted, and please fill out the survey. And with that, thank you, Caitlin and Gabrielle, for sharing today, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.